What inspired you to write The Awakened Brain?
I had been a scientist for about 20 years at Columbia University, and over that time, we had accumulated a very strong scientific case for spirituality in health and wellness, in recovery. Spirituality really is the cornerstone of who we are, how we're made to be. And it was clear as day in the peer review science. In order for a scientific article to be published, it has to be read by two or three other scientists blind to who the authors are, two or three times. By the time something gets published by science and peer review, it's a statement that, to the best of the knowledge of the field, this is fact. It was clear as day in really 2 decades of science that we are born innately spiritual beings, just as we're physical beings and emotional beings and cognitive beings. Every one of us is born with an innate capacity for spiritual awareness. Now, some people express that through religion, and some people express it outside of religion. And the rich, rich, rich tradition of which you speak, the Aboriginal tradition, has a very powerful way of engaging our natural spirituality. About 2/3 of people in post-industrial culture will say, I am spiritual and I am religious. If you think of an overlapping Venn diagram, two circles, and they're at the middle. They say, I'm both spiritual and religious. 30% of millennials and more amongst Gen Z say, I am spiritual, but I am not religious. For me, I feel spiritually connected in nature through music when I'm with my family. Whether or not we are religious, we are all, every one of us, endowed with a deep natural capacity for spirituality. This is how we're born. And we know this in science through twin studies. Now, this natural capacity boots up, it surges, just like we grow and look, suddenly have a, remember in high school when you went away after freshman year and you came back for 10th grade and the boys had grown 4 inches? Suddenly this growth spurt. Well, just as we have this sort of sprouting physically, so too spiritually, we have a growth spurt. And hand in hand, every time there's a physical change, there's spiritual growth as well at midlife as we become elders. This is always the case. Well, there is a whole pathway, a spiritual journey built into us. And yes, I would highly imagine that the Aboriginal tradition understood that, because what we're increasingly coming to see is that data like this, published through twin studies, published through MRI studies, is really a mirror of that which has already been known for thousands of years by rich traditions all around the world. Aboriginal tradition, Native American tradition, all around the world. And science is really kind of late to the table. I would say that, and by no means is science necessary for proof. Proof in your inner wisdom is sufficient. It is powerful. But science is yet one more other lens of knowing. We can take the lens of science and point it at a broad number of questions, including the impact of personal spiritual life in the rest of our lives. What else can be said? And when we do that, if we do strengthen, if we do build our natural spirituality, 2/3 environmental means it takes choice and effort and community and parents and family and tradition. If we build the spiritual core, we're 80% less likely to be addicted to drugs and alcohol using DSM diagnoses, 60% less likely to have major depressive disorder where we power down, where we're edgy, maybe we don't connect with people as we would like. We feel anxious and uncomfortable around others. Major depression is very painful and it's also hard to function. Less likely to be addicted, less likely to be depressed. And the real epidemic of our time, tragically, in post-industrial culture is suicide. In the United States, the rate of death by suicide has surpassed the rate of death by auto accident in high school. In high school. And it's now pressing down to middle school, 13-year-olds. It's a tragedy of our time. And in a very, very conclusive study of studies, a meta-analysis, a lab found that we are 62% less likely to be suicidal, and that goes up to 82% less likely to have a completed suicide when our spiritual life is shared. Now, I dial back to what you just shared, Yvette, so beautifully, of your childhood and the sharing together. Spiritual life is shared of the Aboriginal community. That is exactly what is more protective than anything else. It's coming together on spiritual ground, sharing an understanding of spirit in and through land and one another, sharing ceremony and ritual that awakens us. We all have a naturally spiritual brain, but we must choose to awaken, hence the awakened brain, our natural birthright, our gift to perceive that which is true, the deeper level of reality. The Aboriginals knew this, and rich traditions around the earth knew this. But indeed, it was muted, it was silenced for most of the 20th century, certainly the second half of the 20th century. The clinical and social sciences went ice cold. There was an ice age. And it's only now that we have a strong body of science to mirror that which the traditions have known